deductions were reduced, or the ability to reduce or to write off certain elements of home ownership is now causing people to rethink, because it makes home prices in the Northeast more expensive.
What's more expensive to a large tune? I'm amazed that Fort Lauderdale, 26% jump that we're seeing in luxury condos. How much are you having to work against the fact that some demand is being sapped to a certain extent by foreign buyers not coming in so much?
Well, like I like to say now, is that New Yorkers have become the new foreign buyer for Florida. That the last building boom that they had 7 or 8 years ago really came from South America and Central America. A lot of those economies are in upheaval, and we're not seeing the demand coming out of those locations as we have. But New York, with the higher cost of home ownership and now the impact of the federal tax law, we're seeing some evidence of migration. But you know, I don't want to overstate and say everybody in New York is packing up, or New Jersey, and moving to Florida. But it clearly, we're seeing more and more evidence of an uptick, not only an uptick in the potential migration, but also just in the transactions of higher-end homes. It's been a while, and now we're seeing it take off.
And now, of course, you also have the weather and the water to appeal to those buyers.
Terrible.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, Florida offers no state income tax and low property taxes. For these buyers from the Northeast, what are the residency requirements for Florida? Are they leaving behind their lives in New York, or are they just kind of investing in Florida and then going there maybe 6 months plus 1 day of the year to claim residency in Florida?
Yeah, you know, the way to think of it is it's skewed towards the wealthy end of the demographic spectrum, and it's mainly people that have been on the fence for a while, not necessarily anchored, but are embedded in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metro area. And we're seeing now them, you know, this seemed to be enough to push them off the couch, so to speak, and make this move. It's still really early, though, that I suspect that we're going to see more of this as time passes, as more and more people become educated about this. The thing you have to remember about South Florida is that their housing market has already corrected. That you know, this was something that happened, you know, multiple years ago. And New York is going through a reset of certain types in the metro area as a whole right now.
Talking of correction, I mean, this is actually a worldwide theme. I think of where I come from in London, they're certainly correcting to a certain extent. But even Sydney, Auckland, Vancouver, all these big metro areas are suddenly seeing this re-education in terms of price point. And a lot of it is in some way induced by governments.
Yes.
And are governments therefore realising the ramifications of what they're asking for? Is it resetting in the way they want? Because are these houses actually becoming any more affordable for those who couldn't originally buy them?
The way we're not seeing anything precipitous in terms of price correction. So I think it's going to be a slow grind in that regard. The U.S. is one of the only countries in the world that has benefited from a tremendous amount of international buyers or investors, and hasn't harshly taxed them, like cities, as you mentioned, like Vancouver, where we've seen sales demand really plummet as a result. And we're not seeing that in the U.S. So even though foreign or international demand is not what it was a few years ago, there are advantages to it from their perspective.
I'm glad you bring up the international angle, because it's so important here, especially for cities like Vancouver, like New York, and in South Florida, of course, the LatAm buyers. We spoke with Sam Zell this morning. Here's what he had to say about the importance of the international buyer.
For a while, a couple years ago, every deal was being done by some Chinese-related entity, and all of a sudden, the market was full of excitement and activity. The Chinese obviously have put in place effectively capital controls. That money has both disappeared, and now some of that investment is being repatriated. So that's adding more supply into the market. But generally, sentiment is much more focused on what's the occupancy across the street than what China is or isn't doing.
He mentioned what China is or isn't doing. How are the Chinese buyers right now? How much of a presence do they have? How influential are they in some of the big markets here? Well,
I think the market share of international is certainly well below what it was a few years ago. But even so, the participants, people that are active, seem to be skewing more towards the Chinese, even with the capital controls and the currency play. So that it hasn't changed. It's just at a lower velocity than it was.
By the way, for those who are ditching New York for Florida, what happens? Are they selling their properties on the market here?
I think what they're doing is they're keeping, many are keeping them as a second home, and then looking at Florida as the place to declare the actual domicile.
So much for supply coming onto the market.
Well, $1 million home supply, but still.
Oh, yeah, maybe a bit out of our reach, but anyhow. Wonderful to get your perspective, as always. Great to have you on amid that report, Jonathan Miller. Coming up later today, it's an exclusive interview with Chicago Fed President Charles Evans. He'll, of course, talk about the Fed's path forward, the shutdown's impact on the economy, and much more. He's a voting member, remember? That's 4 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Bloomberg.